Norman Patch. I was 5 years old when war broke out. We lived at number 52 High Street. Our garden backed onto Ham Hill, and I can remember on D-Day sitting with my father on an old bus seat under the hedge at the top of the garden, watching 20 or 30 Dakotas flying over, some towing gliders. When war broke out, my father went to work at Yeovilton, driving a Tilly, a Bedford Dormobile type van. He used to drive the pilots from the control tower to their aircraft. My brother and I went on to work at Yeovilton too. I was a carpenter and my brother was in the engineering works. The Americans arrived in Stoke the Christmas before D-Day, 1943. They gave a party for the Castle School children. I remember being given an orange and having to walk home after the party. The Americans were based in Nissen huts, where the dentist is now, as well as in the Spats factory. Some were billeted out in people's houses. They used to fire bazookas up on Ham Hill. I only smoked one cigarette in my life, and that was when I went into the Spats factory, 3 stories up, with some other boys to talk to the Americans, who gave us candy. One of them asked, had I ever tried smoking? I said no. He gave me a Camel cigarette. After one puff, the soldier said, "Quick, there's an officer coming. Get under the bed. We're not allowed children in here." Afterwards I was sick. My mother asked me what was wrong. When I said I had been smoking a cigarette, she gave me a bash around the head and said, "There, now you've got something to be sick about." The other boys were John Gold, John Davy and Ivan Stone, whose father had the Prince of Wales pub. I was about 10 at the time. The Americans got the women in the village to wash their clothes. When D-Day arrived, they all suddenly disappeared, and some of the women, including Ivy Wilmington in the High Street, were left with a uniform and no money. I remember looking into the American billets after they had gone. There were cigarettes and clothes left strewn on the floor. The Americans used to march up to Hamdon Hall for their meals. There was a galvanised lean-to with a big table where they cooked vegetables and soups. I can't remember many African American soldiers. I learnt afterwards that their job was to take munitions up to the front, and that they came to Stoke to learn to drive, but I can't remember any lorries in Stoke. In Montague Park, the ambulances were nose to tail, all jammed in ready for the front. Musgrove Park Hospital was built by the Americans, for the Americans. All the American soldiers injured in D-Day were brought back to Musgrove Park Hospital. You can see today that the passageways inside are all wide enough to take jeeps. We only had 2 bedrooms, so we didn't have room for evacuees. I remember a little girl with ginger hair and a pigtail. Many years later I heard her talking on the radio about being evacuated to Stoke and living next to Sheila Tatler. I got in touch with her and we visited each other. Some parents came here with their children as evacuees and didn't go home. Flo Dre came with her daughter Shirley. Afterwards Flo stayed in Stoke, but her husband went back home. I remember standing where Tamarisk is now and seeing a plane come over. It was low enough so that I could see the pilot. In 1941 there was a dogfight between a Spitfire and a Messerschmitt above the school. We children were pushed into the cloakroom, where the boys' entrance is. The shells came raining down into the playground, and afterwards we went out and picked them up. The place where they put us was underneath a large water tank. If that had been hit, we would probably all have been killed. My Uncle Ern, who had been in the First World War, was in the ARP, going around telling people to put their lights out. My father had an allotment up in the High Street during the war, and after school we had to go up there and work.